one of the reasons why I got into this race was over a year ago now, contemplating whether to resign as a judge. I had just won retention by supermajority for a 6-year term in Madison and Bond counties and was chief judge for another year, I believe, a year term. And I just felt like as chief judge, I was able to do a lot with very little. And for instance, an example is creating the first veterans court in the state of Illinois, helping troubled veterans get back on their feet. We've grown this court now to be a model for our nation. Hundreds and hundreds of veterans have gone through this program and have graduated successfully. They don't reoffend. And we started that very rudimentarily, no taxpayer dollars, just recruited the right people to be a part of that program. When I put a program together or tried to start an innovation, whether it was in juvenile court or court reform, I never cared if that person was a Republican. I never cared if that person were a Democrat. I just wanted the best person to be part of that committee or coalition to get the job done. And another example that we were able to do is start a foreclosure mediation program. I made it mandatory because I knew it had to be mandatory to work. And some foreclosure mediation programs around our nation aren't successful. Ours is successful because I got the banks to agree to this in the beginning on the ground floor. So they were a part of the dialogue in developing this program. And it's successful now. Lenders get to recoup some of their losses, and the homeowners, the families, get to stay in their homes. And I think I just checked the stats. We're in the hundreds of homes being saved now because of that program. And I was able to institute a lot of court reforms in Madison County. They weren't easy to do, but I thought it was the right thing to do. And I got on the wrong side of my party instituting some of these reforms, but I wanted everyone to agree when they walked through those courthouse doors that they were going to get a fair shake. I wanted them to believe it, and so we did this. And it is really being able to make policy changes for the betterment of the people that I'm honored to be elected by. So this is really expanding my role as a public servant. I do feel blessed that I believe my path in life is helping people, and I think I can continue that. Now, it's been a long time since I've met with some of you beforehand, and the more I travel the district, the more I see such opportunities that I could fill some gaps, just bridge one, like the court system, to our community programs, and really grow jobs and help the communities move along into a positive direction. My number one priority would be to listen to the people that I was honored to be elected by, and how can I help? What can I do? What programs, what innovations, but get to work right away.
Before we talk about some issues, let me go ahead and knock out some explanation about this residency issue that comes up. Can you talk to us about what's going on there?
Well, it's ludicrous to charge me with not living in Madison County and raising my family in Madison County. I sent my children to public schools in Troy, Illinois, something I truly believe in and support. Went to every football game, went to every student-teacher conference, birthday parties, Halloweens. I was invested and loved the community that I raised my children in. And I was a judge for 18 years there. To say that I didn't live in Madison County is a violation of my ethical code and a crime. And that's what they're accusing me of. Just for an example, my son was a quarterback of the Triad football team. His senior year, he led his team to the conference championships. Pursuant to IHSA rules, that'd be stripped of him. They should strip my son's team of that IHSA. The IHSA should strip him of that championship. And there was a time that I didn't live in Madison County when I was a judge. And that's when I had to go into hiding with my children, when a lawyer on a case I was handling, a family case in Bond County, was murdered. And a major case squad whisked me and my children out of town, and we ended up first down in Florida, then we ended up in Chicago, where I had to enroll my children. And it was a very trying time for my children and I. My daughter, she was 4, my son was 7, And I enrolled him in school, and then he was finally caught. His name was Kelly McGinnis, and we got to come home. And I was serving the people of Madison County when I had to go into hiding. So it's just a ludicrous accusation. Ludicrous.
Yeah, is it how many years ago was that? How long were you gone?
That was, let me think about this now. It was 1996. I had been a judge for a very short period of time. We were gone close to 90 days. It was chopped up. I had just become a judge, and I first tried, we went to family, my daughter and I, since she was younger. First we went to Florida with family members, and my son stayed with his dad. He was 7 and going to school. He wasn't doing well then, so then without me, I think he was very worried about me. So we brought him to Florida, and I homeschooled him that period of time, and put my daughter, she didn't really have as much awareness, she was 4, into a preschool there. I really wanted to come back home and work, so we were able to rent an apartment in St. Louis, and deputies, who I'm friends with still to this day, deputy sheriffs would come, and they would pick up me and my children in St. Louis, and under armed guard, my son would be dropped off at school, and then my daughter would be dropped off at her babysitters, and then under armed guard, I would go into work. That didn't last because I believe Mr. McGinnis came back. He was in hiding too. I mean, he wasn't caught yet, and he shot up, I think it was his lawyer's office. So Major Case Squad came to me and said, absolutely, we cannot protect you here. And the sheriff also told me that, and that's when we went to Chicago. And I think we came home around right close before Thanksgiving, and I know I went into hiding because it was my dad's birthday, and that was August 12th.
So the whole thing lasted just 90 days?
Just about
Florida
that.
And Chicago?
Yeah. And I talk about this a lot of times when I talk to women's groups or church groups, because when you go through something like that, you realize what's important in your life. Faith, family to me, and my career was last but important. I wanted to come back, be the best judge that I could be, because we had gone through that. And I tell this story, if I may, of my son. It took me a lot to get him to go to school in Chicago. He wanted to stay with me, and I always thought, oh, that poor young man, he's afraid for himself. But I soon realized he was afraid for me. And that was his way of protecting me. That I finally got him to go to school with certain rules. That I'd stay at school all day. That I'd check on him twice. I didn't, but I got him to go to school I called those Santa Claus lies. I got him to go to school by telling him that I would be there all day. And
what happened? Is Mr. McGinnis in prison now?
He is in prison.
And what did he kill the lawyer?
He did. He shot him in the chest. I remember getting the phone call. I could go through the entire story, maybe later, of what happened, but it was a terrifying ordeal for my children and I.
Okay. As far as the residency, when it was characterized that you signed documents saying you were a resident of Missouri, that the house was in Missouri, is that a mischaracterization? I mean, the address was Missouri on the
right.
On the
Missouri is
claim deed.
Right. And Missouri is a dual tenancy state. I was legally obligated to sign those documents because of the dual tenancy. Even though I didn't have any interest in that property, they were my husband's property. Because of dual tenancy, I was legally obligated to sign those.
As long as we're doing some side issues,
Sure.
Politico came out yesterday and said that the DCCC is dropping some advertising. I understand that they're continuing to fund ads for you in our region.
Mm-hmm.
It's cheaper on TV. In the St. Louis market, there was going to be like a week, and they decided perhaps not to go with you to waste the air going into Missouri or whatever. What does that indicate? Does that indicate where is the campaign? Because I know the polls have showed your opponent ahead as well.
Well, I don't wake up in the morning to see what the national Democrats and the national press are saying about me and guide my campaign. I know we have built an extremely strong ground game. I see that. I saw that this morning, and I am confident that we are in a very, very good place. I have a very good team around me, and we are in a very good place in this election. I'm just constantly really amazed that we have such a good ground game and good people on the ground and extraordinary volunteers, many of them students, but many of them older people. So we forge every day ahead.
One more political question,
Sure,
and then
sure.
we'll get to something real. But I think it's your ads and the NCCC's ads have both talked about, Rodney Davis hasn't turned down first-class flights for members of Congress. Isn't that a really silly thing to do? Because there are Democratic and Republican bills that say, no, he didn't vote on the Democratic one. He's never taken a first-class flight paid for by taxpayers. Isn't this insulting to taxpayers that you're even going in this direction?
I don't believe so. I mean, there's a bill out there now, a Republican-sponsored bill that says
with eight sponsors.
Yeah.
I mean, out of 400 or however many members of the House.
True.
Okay.
If our service members fly coach, then our congressmen and women should fly coach. And I believe that because my son was deployed, and I sat in Fort Carson along with other families waiting literally day after day after day. First, it was delayed because of the situation in Iraq. But then day after day, and they weren't flying coach home. And as we know, congressmen and women on both parties are still flying first class on the taxpayer dime. I don't know how often it happens, but why don't they come together? Mr. Davis specifically voted against a bill that specifically banned first-class flights.
Alternative to the budget. Why would a Republican be expected to vote for the Democratic alternative to the budget? You wouldn't vote for Paul Ryan's budget, would you?
No, I wouldn't vote for Paul Ryan's budget.
So why do you expect him to vote for what's not in his party's interest so you can take advantage of it in an ad?
Again, the Republicans are in charge of the House, and if they wanted their members of Congress to fly coach, then they should pass that bill.
Your son is in the military.
Yes, ma'am.
Wondering what your thoughts are on ISIS and the U.S. Response to that right now. Do you support what's being done? Is there something different?
Well, I do support the airstrikes in Syria. Whether the timing of that, I think history will come out and determine that. I can tell you my son was there in Kuwait. His deployment was extended because of the situation in Iraq. He's a ranger, he's an infantry officer, and he didn't tell me much, but I know he told me of one attack that he had heard about, of what happened up north where he was stationed, and he said the savagery is just incomprehensible. What's going on there? Pure and utter savagery.
And he's in what country now?
He's back.
Oh,
it was blessed day a few months ago. I was able to welcome him home, and he is he's changed and he's in a scout and sniper unit, and he's training at Fort Benning right now.
But he was in Kuwait, and was he in Afghanistan as well?
No, just Kuwait.
Just Kuwait, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Immigration reform.
Yeah, I think it has stalled, and I think it's time. It's time we pass comprehensive immigration reform. There have been estimates from CBO within the next 9 or so years it would increase our GDP 3.5%, something like $7 billion brought into our economy, and the next decade after that, 5.5% increase in our GDP to $1.4 trillion brought into our economy. I think it strengthens our borders. I think it has safeguards to citizenship, a 10-year extensive background checks, takes about 10 years. I just think it's time. It's time that we pass comprehensive immigration reform.
How might that benefit Illinois specifically?
Well, sure. Just a specific, instance I'll tell you is when I traveled around Research Park at the University of Illinois and those world-class companies that are there, I talked to some of the officials from Yahoo, and their number one issue was comprehensive immigration reform, to bring in more innovators into our nation. So I think it to me, again, is what I like to do, and what I'd like to do as chief is to build a coalition so we can join these great companies like Yahoo with some student organizations and have a dialogue, and let's talk about really getting comprehensive immigration reform done for the betterment of the people that live in our district. I've had students also this is the number one issue with them. It's generally that this has happened, that this is forefront up north in Champaign-Urbana area.
Yeah, that of course is companies looking for highly trained individuals who want to be able to be here. But you've also got is it still 11 or 12 million people who came illegally? Some you've got children and families.
Sure.
And people who don't want this to happen called it amnesty. And so is the way the Senate passed it, which is a pathway to citizenship, are you all for what they passed?
I'm for a pathway to citizenship, and there's a difference in just a clear-cut amnesty where they just get a free pass. I mean, it's difficult for these people to attain citizenships. As I said before, it takes about process of about 10 years, extensive background checks and citizenship tests and strengthening our borders. Everything, I think, in a comprehensive manner that's necessary to pass immigration reform.
Health care it certainly was a big issue in this district 2 years ago.
Yes.
Where are you? I think that Congressman Davis still talks about repeal and replace, and you've talked about tune up when necessary.
Sure.
Please characterize for us.
Yes, it's evolved since I came in this race, because it was evolving when I was in the race, and we all agree disastrous rollout. But what do we do for the people of the 13th Congressional District? And this morning, it's interesting. Every time you hear various stories, and you hear people that are concerned. For instance, people do especially students, like to be on their policy till their parents' policy till they're 26. Pre-existing conditions, no discrimination. I've heard people like that. People like the savings, the Medicare cost, drug cost savings. But I also hear people do not like that. They want to stay on their own insurance. So that would be a change. Why couldn't we change that? People can stay on their own insurance. Also, people are concerned about the size of their businesses and the tax credits. They maybe want them expanded for the ACA implementation. And so I would be interested in looking at that too. But it have
going beyond the 50 people.
Yeah.
Would it be 100?
Well, that's what I would be interested in. How nuanced would that be? And where could we draw the line? What could we do to help? But I've had that question asked to me twice. However, you hear more and more anecdotal stories. One young man came up to me and he said he had contracted a terrible blood-borne staph infection. And it was very serious. He said he has insurance now for the first time because of ACA, and he believes it saved his life. Because he said, there was no way I would have gone to get treatment at the hospital because it's too expensive. And then just a week or two ago, I had a woman write me and then come to my campaign office and meet me. She's a nurse, and her son had aged out of her insurance policy, and he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and died. And she truly believes that if ACA was in place, he would be living. And so you hear those different stories. So it's not black or white. It's in place. I also have learned that 14,000 people now in our district have insurance now because of the ACA. So let's not rip that insurance away from those people. Let's work and build and strengthen it, make it better, and adapt it to our district. And how can we, in a nuanced fashion, adapt that to our district?
Okay, so possibly increasing the number of employees you have before you have to have employer
right.
purchase insurance is one change. Any other particular change?
Well, that you could stay on your own insurance. If you like your own insurance, you should be able to stay on that own insurance.
We're coming to another.
Sure.
Are going out.
That can be kind of a problem, though, right?
Yeah, because isn't that underperforming insurance?
Well, true. But again, I have people. This is what I hear on and they if they like it, let them stay on it. And if we could get
that doesn't cover what they need to cover.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but let's start there, and then maybe we can build on that. Maybe we could find a common ground, not the bare bones. I know which insurance you're talking about, just that bare bones catastrophic insurance, but maybe there's something in between that we can help them stay on their insurance with a little assistance with having more that conforms to the ACA.
So you wouldn't be inclined to lean more towards single payer?
No, sir.
Farm policy, big in this district. They did pass an extended farm bill. Are things good with that, or any changes necessary?
I think finally that we pass a farm bill is a good thing. That finally that it was passed, yeah. And that's what I hear.
Since we talked to you in the spring,
Sure.
the VA hospital.
The scandal. Yeah.
What do you think about how that was handled? Do you consider it cleaned up? Is there more work to be done? What needs to be done?
Well, I think there was a start, and it is starting to get cleaned up. But it was having started the first Veterans Court in Madison County, and we made that multifaceted. We just didn't treat this person has committed or had a DUI, and he just goes to DUI treatment. We also had someone come over and from Johnny Cochran Hospital in St. Louis that treats PTSD. We had housing counseling and jobs counseling, and you do hear just complaint after complaint of how VA was how their personal stories are. So yeah, we need to reform it. And I called in the beginning for the head of resignation for the head of the VA when this started to unfold, because I think just we need to comprehensively reform the way it's done there and the way these veterans are treated. Because I just heard from a young woman today she's an Army veteran and her husband's a Marine veteran, and they still have trouble when they go and costs and when they go to the VA and treatment. So it's just it's a Herculean task, I know, but it's something that we need to work together and get done and improve.
What is your sense of where the problem lies? Do you have a sense of that? Is it bureaucracy?
I think bureaucracy. It just seemed almost an endemic problem. So I don't know if it's replicated throughout each hospital, each VA hospital, but I would say investigate the hospitals individually, fully audited. Is there accountability, and put all that in place, and then we can build on that. But a comprehensive approach to reform is needed. And then we can go into the individual hospitals and actually help the people that they're serving.
It seemed like with all of the problems in the world, some things have faded. There was a lot of talk maybe in primary season about how, a third or something of every dollar America spends is borrowed now, and the deficit. How do you get control of the deficit? And because there's a lot of talk, are we leaving this debt to our children? So what steps would you take, either in areas of Social Security or other entitlements? How does what does the tax structure need to do, or what does the economy need to do?
Yeah.
How do we get there?
Well, there's a bill out there, Government Waste Reduction Act. I think that's a start. I think that's a smart way. Let's look at what we need to trim, what we can cut, what we can consolidate to make our government function more properly and efficiently. Also, there is a task force out there called the HEAT Task Force, which is a U.S. Attorney-led task force that goes after fraud, waste, and abuse in Medicare and Medicaid. We strengthen that. I think they've already recouped about over in the billions of dollars already. So that's something we can look at and strengthen. And also, I think allowing Medicare to negotiate directly with the drug companies for drug costs, I think that would precipitously drop those costs like the VA is allowed to do.
What do you think we spend too much money on as a country? What do we not spend enough on? That's a broad question.
Yeah, that's a broad question. Well, again, I think that we have to attack it just in a fashion of what is there that we could save money on, not really just broadly based, we spend too much money here, we spend too much money there. But how could we, as chief judge, for instance, I was able to return, it's over $200,000 back to the general fund because I thought it was important that we tightened our belt as a government entity. So where can we cut fraud, waste, and abuse? Where is that at? How can we go after that? And I think what I had previously mentioned before is a good start. It's, again, really something that you would have to reach across the aisle and get things done in a comprehensive manner, which I know people say that it's just hyper-partisan up there, but it's something that I would look forward to. And
Did you see the news over the weekend that talked about the ways the pharmaceutical companies set prices? In this case, it was about particular cancer treatment drugs. That just, the numbers are so large, I can't even get my arms around it.
Right.
But that there's no negotiation
Right.
with those drugs, and they actually, when the doctors use them, the doctors gain 6 to 7%
Right.
Return on what they've paid, what the hospital may have paid for the drugs.
Well, and I also saw there's some junkets being involved in that with.
Well, and at one point there was one massive challenge to this one pharmaceutical company, and they said, "Oh, okay," and they just cut the price in half like that.
Right.
So how would you regulate that? I mean, people don't like regulations, but you allow those kind of companies to essentially rip off people in their catastrophic situations, and they either go broke by paying for it, but they don't get it.
Well, I think that again would be a way the U.S. attorney led could see why is this happening, or perhaps a congressional hearing. Why are these drug companies charging these astronomical amounts to people that are dying, essentially dying?
Well, part of the issue is that they've been allowed to simply say it costs X number of dollars to develop this, and we have to recoup those costs. But nobody asks them to prove up what the cost is.
Well, sure, and then institute some transparency. Absolutely, institute some transparency. Transparency is always good, as far as I could see with government entities. I instituted that as chief judge. I think it's important to have accountability and transparency. So I think that would be something that I would try to work on.
Given that this is a swing district, just what's the general philosophy? Why should you, a Democrat, replace Rodney Davis, a Republican? What is it that people are not getting from him that they would get from you, philosophy-wise or whatever?
Okay. Well, I truly believe, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, because I can tell you there's an enormous amount of skepticism out there, enormous amount of skepticism, because they see the dysfunction in Congress. And I tell them, you can judge my future as in the public sector as my past. And I truly believe in public service. That philosophy I really impressed upon the circuit judges and associate judges in the Third Judicial Circuit when I would talk to juries, because I had the honor and privilege of admonishing the jury pools every time they came in as chief judge. We do the Pledge of Allegiance, and I would welcome them to our justice system. And I would tell them, I am your servant. We serve you. So having a history of being a public servant and doing these programs and innovations compared to a person, I'm not a political operative like Rodney Davis. I'm not a political insider. My number one priority would be serving the people of this district, having office hours, having town hall meetings, going out to the community centers, which I've traveled to. I really, and I don't know if the last time I spoke to you, but there just seems to be an enormous opportunity in the place of where they have these community centers and have I guess man camps, and then they try to help juveniles and with some truancy programs. I see a huge opportunity because we not only need jobs here, but also of being a bridge to the justice system. How can I expand on these types of programs that truly help our communities in their each individual and unique way of helping them? And it's just, I'm very, very excited about the opportunity to serve, and that's what I would do.
If you talk about community forums, I know trackers follow you because I saw the America Rising guy downtown when you had the Sierra Club thing. Mm-hmm. And I know that must be very difficult for candidates on both sides. On the other hand, I don't recall, of all this openness, I don't recall that you had a press conference since the primary in Springfield. What is it about the current philosophy of campaigning that says you advertise with some guy with, something covering up his eyes because he's sleeping in first class, but why don't you get free press by coming and talking to us and opening yourself to questions more often to get people to know who you are? Well,
I've been out in the community as much as I can, and I try to travel around as much as I can and be as available as much as I can. So I could just assure you that's what I would do, is reaching out, because you can't be insulated, and I learned this as it's been a blessing being a congressional candidate, in that I learned a lot about finding my voice and as a public servant, but also your life as a judge is insular. And I didn't realize how insular it was until I was able to resign and become a candidate and meet such wonderful people.
I mentioned Sierra Club. Obviously, energy policy, I think, is a difference between you and Congressman Davis. You got the Sierra Club endorsement. They kind of make fun of that because the Sierra Club doesn't, they
Right.
think coal plants are killers
Sure.
and they want no more. We have a lot of coal in the
Sure.
district, including in Springfield. So,
Sure.
Energy policy and what it
Well-
means to coal and what it means to the economy of this district where there's still coal as an industry.
Well, I did receive the Sierra Club endorsement, but we don't agree on everything. For instance, Future Gen, I think, is a great thing for the advancement of our economy here. It's not in our district, but
I
I.
that too, isn't he?
Pardon me?
Is
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. Yeah. So, but in Sierra Club, I received their endorsement mainly, I believe, on local issues. They knew me in Alton. They really wanted to protect the confluence and the beautiful bald eagles there, and they knew I was chief judge there. So they have heard of me. So I developed a relationship with them, and then also the Mahomet Aquifer in Springfield was very important, and Champaign, and protecting the Mahomet Aquifer, the single source of water, and the company from Chicago wanted to come down and put PCBs on top of that. So it was more regionally driven endorsement, but nationally, do we agree on all issues? No, I support clean coal innovation, and I think Future Gen is a great opportunity for our area, and I think even an opportunity. I think they may have an educational center there, so that would be wonderful too. Let's join those with our local universities, our local community colleges, so we can do more partnerships, so we can grow innovations and jobs right here.
Is it Sierra Club that doesn't like Future Gen? Is
Yes.
that what you were saying? Okay.
Yeah.
I
I
wasn't
think
sure
so.
of that. I hesitate.
National Sierra Club
Okay.
is my understanding.
I hesitate to bring up the word Ebola because I don't want to overblow it, but
Yes.
I'm sure people are talking to you about this because it's kind of a big national issue and the federal government. Your thoughts on the Obama administration, what we're doing and what should be done?
Well, yes. People, strangely enough, this morning, Ebola didn't come up. But it's very scary, the fact that, and I think that putting the funds to where the source is in West Africa, and the unfortunate what happened with the gentleman from Liberia, who I think is in grave condition, but containment there is where we need to be, and then hopefully containment if any further outbreaks here. The CDC has said absolutely for certain they know they can have a handle on if there are any further outbreaks here in the United States. But again, it did make me think of the recklessness of the shutdown of the government because the CDC was shut down, and what would have happened then.
You're saying Rodney Davis
Rodney,
did that, and
yeah.
he says he didn't, but I understand your point because I've written that he took steps that people thought,
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's been kind of interesting, just, you've talked about ISIS, immigration, and now Ebola.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of those becomes an issue, it strikes me, because we're able to put a face on it. With ISIS, it's beheadings,
Right.
killings, and immigration, all the
And then
children.
Ebola, you see the virus on
Oh,
TV.
yeah. But I just kind of wonder, are we driven by our policy decisions,
Mm-hmm.
going to war,
Mm-hmm.
again, driven by something that,
That-
I hate to say that it happens, but it
Right,
happens,
right. And that I think you're saying is just because of the rapidity of information received that we react. Well, that's interesting, and I would just have to hope and trust, and especially in something like ISIL or ISIS, that trust our military leaders that they have a grasp on the situation and what steps need to be taken. And the airstrikes, of course. Now you're hearing some of the people coming into Turkey are saying that those airstrikes aren't working. I mean, that's what you read, but I'm not privy, again, to the security briefings, but I would, again, try to place as much trust in our military as we can. And also separating my private from my public, because my son, being in the Special Forces training now, will most likely be redeployed, but it's not going to happen until this summer, because he and I finally had a long conversation last night, and I was relieved.
What's your experience your opinions, anything that you've experienced as a judge around the variety of racial disparity that exists in our country. Healthcare outcomes, educational outcomes, the recent reemergence of the factual side of law enforcement and its approach to people of color in America. How would you address any of that?
Well, I think right, and I was a judge. I was a felony judge for 7 years, and there we were, as chief judges, studied a lot of the issues in diversity, especially in the jury pools, and how you capture more people that would be reflective of the communities in our jury pools. Not so much in Madison County because it didn't have as higher as an African American population as other counties, but we as Chief Judges Conference did study that. So it'd be an issue that we can approach, and I know the U.S. Attorney's Office has done some studies, and I know what's happened in Ferguson I know President Clinton's coming down, I think, in a day or two to study that issue with the leaders there. But that's not. I think Ferguson may be a microcosm of what's going on elsewhere.
How do you really see that? I mean, is it just isolated, or would you see that as endemic or representative of?
I think in what we see and hear from reading and what I see and hear in the national news, that it's endemic. I don't think we would be having, world former president coming down and discussing this issue. The more it's discussed, the more there's a free flow of ideas. But what I saw, what was going on there, especially with the detained people and higher in African Americans than others, to pay their traffic fines was disgraceful. And so those, now that that's out in the open and being challenged, hopefully further dialogue and spotlight will move us in the right direction.
We've had a little discussion in Springfield with the sheriff's race in the county because our sheriff's department got an MRAP.
Yes.
And do you have any opinion on military equipment like that going to local police departments?
Well, it sounded, I think it sounded like a good idea to save dollars in these excess, but the visual of that you saw in the St. Louis newspapers of police officers in tanks and then people protesting, it was just startling. So I think that we need.
Parked in front of the Boys and Girls Club on Saturday.
There was. It was a mini one.
It was like home death.
It was a mini one, but and I thought that event as a whole was a good thing because it did bring law enforcement, and I really liked seeing that, and I liked seeing that community involvement. And every time I go to a function like that or visit Boys Hope, Girls Hope, is something that I get excited about being able to help serve and foster.
Should these big machines still be available from the feds to the local units of government like our sheriff's department, or do you have an opinion on that?
I think that it should go by case basis. Is it really necessary, or is this tank sitting something that they just put in front of Boys Hope, Girls Hope because they think that the kids would like to look at it? I mean, I think it'd have to go by case and a little more oversight on what's getting put into these police officers' hands and training.
Could you talk a little bit about President Obama and how you line up with him ideologically in terms of how often you agree with him, what you think his biggest successes have been, and where are your biggest areas of disagreement, if there are any?
Well, overarchingly, I think he has struggled with communication and what he means, and what happened in Syria was saying that there was a red line, and then that red line was crossed, and then there was a lot of, I think, confusion over what he meant and what has occurred there. But I think his greatest accomplishment was killing Osama bin Laden. I think that took a lot of courage to send the SEAL Team 6 in there to rid our nation of Osama bin Laden's threat. So it unfolds. There's some policies, but I think overarchingly is his lack of communication of of what his vision is. The abysmal rollout, and it seemed to take a while for him to come out and explain what occurred there. So I think,
Talking about the healthcare.
yeah, oh yeah.
About the Middle East situation, and I know you have the personal thing with your son, but are you okay with American troops going in if necessary in a combat role?
I think that we have to take this situation very gravely. I think ISIL is a grave, grave threat to our nation, and I think that we should listen to our military leaders and what their assessment is. I do know that we have the greatest military in the world, and from personal experience of seeing my son and his brothers and sisters in arms, that if they are called to duty, they will serve our country to the greatest of their ability.
Okay, so you're not saying absolutely not. It kind of depends on how things go
Right.
up. Okay. Business climate of America versus the world is a discussion. When Senator Oberweis was here taking on Senator Durbin, they talked about, Oberweis was talking about the tax rate that we put on corporations, and that's why some of them are trying to go overseas. You know, what is your thought on the business climate in America? How do you keep jobs here? How do you, can you as a member of Congress, if you get there, develop jobs, and how are you going to do that with things like tax rate?
Sure. I think Senator Durbin billed the Patriot Corporation Tax Credit Act. I think that would be a good thing, a good movement in the right direction for our country. Closing.
What would that do?
That would move our country in the right direction, to be able to build corporations to be able to invest in the United States.
Yeah, tax breaks to
And
stay.
sure, and provide prevailing wage jobs and provide health care for the people that work there. So I think that's a move in the right direction. I think closing loopholes for corporations that ship our jobs overseas, we could do that. I think, I've talked to this came up on an individual basis. A gentleman came up to me and said that he's a father of 5, that his wife is a stay-at-home mom, and that she homeschools her children, and he feels like he's burdened with taxes. And could we expand on child credit taxes on child credit? I mean, what could we do to help our middle-income families so they can't feel burdened and feel like they're just not getting ahead?
Should minimum wage be?
I think we should raise minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. I think the more that I have traveled around this district, people are really, and you hear story after story, students trying to get ahead, going to community college, working full-time, and they just cannot keep their head above the poverty line. And
it's individual circumstances of the whole labor force has shifted.
Sure.
In terms of, there used to be a lot of manufacturing jobs.
Sure.
And you just get out of high school and go right
Sure.
into a job that paid a middle-class income.
Sure.
That doesn't exist anymore. So regardless of what people think the wages ought to be, in terms of the minimum wage or
Sure.
whatever, it seems to me that there's a more systemic issue that isn't really being addressed.
Well,
We spend a lot of time arguing
Yes.
about what minimum wage should be without recognizing the millions of more people who are now making minimum wage based on previous economies. So what would you look at in terms of the bigger picture of economic shift and change from Congress's point?
Well, in development too, and I think you bring up an excellent point. And when I was in Decatur a few days ago at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast, for instance, and I've had this idea, I've spoke to a lot of people about this, and a gentleman who spoke said that there are manufacturing jobs out there. I believe there's skilled truck driving jobs out there, but there's a gap. So what do we do? What can we do to help our individual 13th Congressional District grow? And I think, and I've talked to many people about this, and vocational training, voc training in our high schools have been cut because of lack of funding. But how can we restore that? How can we get our businesses to invest in our communities in a public-private partnership way to expand on these types of vocational training in our high schools so our children can graduate from these programs technologically savvy, skilled, if the businesses are invested, having a job waiting for them. And we could start it in a pilot program in one high school. We have great, I think, apprenticeship programs in our community colleges too. So how can we, and I've talked to a lot of students about this today, how can we get some of our local businesses, some of our local corporations to start investing further in these types of apprenticeship programs, joining with labor so our children can graduate, our young people, savvy, skilled, ready to work, and raising their families in our communities. It's just, how can we take incremental steps to move our communities forward and make them more successful? And I don't think we need to just reinvent the wheel, too. The ideas that I had in Madison County, for instance, Veterans Court, I was at a conference and I saw Buffalo, New York, started a Veterans Court and how successful that was. I came back, got the judges together and said, we're starting a Veterans Court. We need it started in about 4 or 5 months. This is what I saw that we could do, and we can help our veterans. And that's what I would do, be open to ideas, explore what works in other communities, and let's make it work here in the unique way that we can.
How much does this race cost so far? You know how much you've raised? Is it like $1.5 million?
Yeah, it's somewhere around there. It's an inordinate amount of money, and I will preempt and say I am for campaign finance reform.
And
having lived
what
it.
form should that take?
Well, I just...
They keep trying, but the Supreme Court says spend pretty much what you want.
Yes, I know, and corporations are people. And there is Government by the People Act out there that does just publicly subsidize so congressmen and women can go out and spend more time campaigning and meeting people is what I like. The fact that money plays such a large role in my race and in every race across the nation is an upside down view. And I will, win or lose, be advocating against campaign finance, for campaign finance.
But you're saying public financing of campaigns for Congress?
Possibly.
Okay,
I'd put that on the table.
Is that a good use of tax money? I mean, I'm just saying because everybody's touchy about their taxes.
Well, I know people. Well, in a common sense way, what ideas are out there but to have this money and the blind money pour into these races is just. I think that's why. It seemed to be, when I was talking to some people, I mean, they were enough interested to come. And a lot of these, one was a middle-aged woman that came, and it's nearly impenetrable, their just lack of caring anymore, that they feel like they've been left behind.
Who are you talking
and
about?
Just people that I meet on the street, that they feel like they've been left behind, and that Congress just doesn't care, and they see over and over again on commercials people paying lip service, but not delivering. And I had a long conversation of what I was before in service, and that history can predict your future as a public servant. So just to assure her, but people are just tuned out.
So one of the difficulties, though, is you go from being a chief judge,
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
who comes back from New York and says, we're going to do this. And then
Yes.
you go in January.
Yeah, I know.
And not only a brand new member, but a minority
Sure.
party member. So how does that work?
Well,
For that?
well, I am for public service, and I did give that up. But I think that you still, and I will make as many relationships and be on whatever committees that help the people in my district the most. They would be my primary focus. And I think a congresswoman could get a lot done in our district just by bringing people together. Just right before when I was chief judge, I formed a coalition in talking about mental health and gun ownership, because there's a lot of laws on the books in Illinois. And I was able to get Republican representatives and Democratic representatives from the legislature, judges, people from law enforcement, people from the mental health community, and to just have a dialogue. Now, I left before that got started, but I think there are so many ways, so many avenues. The relationships I've made with a lot of the chief judges around the district, and how we can build on programs like Veterans Court, like restorative justice programs around our district, and start that way. But I think there's just a lot that can be done if you have leadership from your congresswoman in the district to help people.